Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. I'm sure most of us have had a burger from some dodgy looking van at the side of the road, and afterwards you've been left wondering what exactly the meat was in the burger. If you lived in Maryland in the 90s and you enjoyed a roadside burger around that time, you might find yourself desperately trying to remember what exactly the owner of that burger stand looked like. And if that particular burger seller looked anything like Joe Metheny, then you'd have every right to be seriously worried. Joseph Roy Metheny was born on the 2nd of March 1955 in Baltimore, Maryland. How his childhood went seems to depend entirely on who was telling the story, and this is a theme that we'll get used to in this case. Talking about it years after the fact, Joe Metheny insinuated that both he and his 5 siblings were neglected. According to him, his alcoholic father had died in a car accident in 1961, and he also says that his mother passed away at a later date. These comments must have come as a bit of a shock to Mrs. Metheny, who, after Joe's arrest, was still very much alive. She said that whilst she did have to work multiple odd jobs to make ends meet, there was nothing unusual or particularly hard about his childhood compared to others. She did confirm that his father was indeed a heavy drinker and he had passed on after a car accident. She disputed Joe's other comments about his hardship and upbringing. His teachers and his mother both recall that Joe Metheny was a very polite young man and he did well in his classes, showing a spark of intellect. This politeness and intelligence would follow him throughout his life, although it would become warped and jaded over time. His drug addiction began, according to him, after he joined the army at 19 and served a tour in Vietnam. There he'd become reliant on heroin. According to his mother, he did indeed join the army at that age, but she recalled him being stationed in Europe. She did confirm that he started taking drugs and his life began to spiral out of control, but she was adamant that the Vietnam tale was completely false. It should also be noted that the US Army had no active involvement in Vietnam by the time that Joe was in the army. No records exist of him being stationed in Southeast Asia or seeing any action there. That's the thing with Joe Metheny, it's hard to separate fact from fiction. When he became involved with drug taking and alcohol abuse, it quickly overtook his life, but at the same time he was able to hold down a respectable job as a forklift operator. His co-workers described him as being intelligent, well-mannered and kind. By day he moved pallets and stacked them in the warehouse, taking home a pretty good wage. By night, he would retreat to his trailer that was parked on the grounds of his workplace, or he would head out and spend his night with a group of homeless or drug-addicted men, drinking and abusing every drug that he could get his hands on. Joe Metheny was a large man. He described himself in the following words: "I'm 48 years old. I weigh about 450 pounds, and it's not all fat." That's a weight in excess of 32 stone, and at the height of 6'1", he was an imposing figure. He was affectionately, if ironically, referred to as tiny by his friends. Now, exactly when Joe Metheny started killing is not quite clear. Metheny's first confirmed murder came in 1994, a woman named Kathy Ann Magaziner. She was a 39-year-old prostitute that he'd met and taken back to his trailer. After sexually assaulting her, he took an extension cord and wrapped it round her neck, then slowly strangled her to death. Immediately after the murder, he buried her remains in a shallow grave. Later, he must have had a change of mind because he dug up her body and hacked off her head before throwing it into the trash. He reburied what was left of her body in a nearby woods. The second confirmed murder was a woman named Kimberly Lynn Spicer. She was stabbed to death in November of 1996. This was barely a month before Metheny was arrested. Kimberly Lynn Spicer was another prostitute who was addicted to heroin. Once again, she had been lured to Joe's trailer park home before he sexually assaulted her and then stabbed her. There was another attempted murder a month later, in December of 1996. He brought a woman named Rita Kemper back to his trailer. They shared some drugs together, and then when she rebuffed his sexual advances, he attacked her. He then threatened to bury her in the woods with the other girl. Rita Kemper escaped, and she reported the attack to the police. After Rita Kemper's escape, Joe Metheny realised that he would probably be under police investigation, and so, bizarrely, he asked a friend to help him move the body of Kimberly Lynn Spicer to a more secure burial ground. His friend was clearly very shocked by being asked to do this, and instead of helping Metheny, he went to the authorities and reported it. Joe was quickly arrested. Metheny was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. On the 5th of August 2017, aged 62, he died, still behind bars. Now, you might be wondering at this point, why did I mention the burgers in the intro? Where did they fit in? Well, according to Joe, he also worked at a roadside burger van, and he has suggested that some of his victims may have ended up in the burgers. The only problem is, as we've already established, Joseph Metheny isn't exactly a reliable source of information. If every one of his claims were to be believed, then he has a body count of over 10 people, maybe as high as 13, yet he's only ever been convicted of 2 murders. He was suspected in a number of other killings though. In 1995, the bodies of 2 homeless men were found under Hanover Street Bridge. They'd both been hacked to death with an axe. Joe Metheny claims that he killed these men, and he was tried for it, but eventually he was acquitted due to lack of evidence. There's also Toni Lynn Ingracia. She was a young woman who struggled with drug addiction, and her body was found in 1994, dumped along the I-95 not far from where Metheny worked. She had been strangled and stabbed to death. Joseph Metheny was suspected of murdering Toni Ingracia, but again, there wasn't enough evidence to convict him. And these ones I would describe as his grey area victims, people who Joe might have killed and we have the bodies but we just don't know for sure. But there's also many people who Metheny claimed to have killed where there just isn't any evidence at all, no bodies or murder weapons or any indication that they weren't just figments of his wild imagination. So exactly how many victims Joe Metheny had is a matter of debate, as is his claims of cooking up the remains of his victims. According to him, at some point during his killing spree, he started to butcher his victims and kept the meat in Tupperware in his freezer. He would then mix this meat into burgers and sandwiches and sell them to unsuspecting members of the public at a pop-up stand on the roadside. According to Joe, these burgers were extremely popular. He describes the taste of the burgers as follows. They were very good. The human body taste is very similar to pork. If you mix it together, then nobody can tell. Now, whether you believe this is up to you. I can't find an answer either way. There doesn't seem to be any evidence that he did this, but he did definitely murder 2 people, so it seems that his stories might be a mix of truth and fiction, so there might be some truth in the burger story. It's not entirely outside the realms of possibility. I think it's possibly the appearance of Joe Metheny. He's such a large character, the idea that he would be serving human meat burgers to people just seems to fit somehow. As I say, the claims are unprovable, but that also means they're pretty hard to debunk as well. Anyone who lived in Baltimore, Maryland around that time and had a burger from some pop-up stand is always going to be left wondering, is there any possibility that they unknowingly ate human meat? So I'll leave you with some final words from the man himself. He says, "Well, that's my story. Horrible but true. So next time you're riding down the road and you happen to see an open pit beef stand that you've never seen before, make sure you think about this story before you take a bite of that sandwich. Sometimes you never know who you may be eating." And there you go, that's the story of Joe Metheny. Thank you very much for watching. As always, a big thanks to the patrons who are supporting the channel. If you'd also like to support the channel in some way, then you can check out the links below, or simply leave a like or a comment on the video. That also helps me out too. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.